You say you want peace. You speak about it like it's the answer to all your suffering, like it's something out there, waiting for you at the end of a meditation app or behind some candlelit affirmation. But let's be brutally honest. You don't want peace. You want silence that doesn't hurt. You want to stop feeling without actually confronting what's inside. You want calm that doesn't require change. You want comfort without confrontation. That's not peace. That's sedation. And the problem isn't that the world is loud. The problem is that your inner world is screaming, and you've become addicted to anything that helps you not hear it. Carl Jung warned us, what you resist persists. You say you're spiritual now. You wear crystals. You say the universe has a plan. But the truth is, you're hiding. You don't sit in stillness. You avoid it. You don't meditate to grow. You do it to escape. You think you're healing, but really, you're avoiding. Because true peace isn't a filtered life. It's radical self-confrontation. It's facing the version of you that you've buried beneath years of pretending. It's admitting that everything you call growth has just been you putting makeup on the same old wounds. You don't want to be alone because when everything goes quiet, you start to hear the truth. And that's terrifying. The moment the noise stops, when the phone is down, when no one's texting, when the TV is off, you meet someone you don't know how to handle. Yourself. And he's not what you imagined. He's fragile, bitter, angry, hollow. He's the version of you you've been hiding even from yourself. And now you're face to face with it. You want peace, but you panic in silence. You crave stillness, but it terrifies you. Why? Because stillness shows you everything you haven't dealt with. And that is what you're really running from. Peace doesn't come from quieting the world. It comes from making peace with what's already inside you. But most people would rather scroll endlessly, chase temporary highs, or drown themselves in toxic company than face themselves. You seek peace through distraction, through consumption, through obsession with appearance. You buy things you don't need. You stay in relationships that hollow you out. You seek validation like it's oxygen. And every time silence creeps in, you panic, because silence is the only thing that doesn't lie to you. Think about it. The world has taught you that noise equals life, that constant motion equals success, that productivity equals worth. So now, when you're still, you feel worthless. When you're alone, you feel abandoned. When you're not performing, you feel like you're disappearing. That's not a longing for peace. That's a fear of absence. A fear of confronting the fact that your worth has always been tied to noise, to attention, to others. You've mistaken being seen for being real. And when no one's watching, you forget how to exist. This is where Carl Jung's teachings cut deepest. He believed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. You think fate is keeping you anxious, that it's destiny that you can't find rest. That it's just how you are, that you can't be alone. But no, it's not fate, it's avoidance. You've created a life that keeps you just busy enough to never have to feel, and you've convinced yourself that it's normal, that restlessness is just part of adulthood, that burnout is a badge of honor, that numbness is stability. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, take a moment to share it in the comments. What part of this journey felt most personal to you? And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. This is just the beginning of what we're building together. But here's the brutal truth. The reason you can't find peace is because you're not willing to lose who you think you are. And who you think you are is built on fear, on control, on performance. Peace doesn't fit into that identity, so it gets rejected every single time it tries to enter. That's why stillness scares you. That's why silence feels like death, because somewhere deep down, you know that if you really stopped, everything you've built might collapse. But maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Maybe peace isn't what you imagined. Maybe it's not candles and quotes and calm ocean sounds. Maybe peace is the moment you finally stop lying to yourself. Maybe it's the moment you admit that you're exhausted from pretending. that you don't know who you are without the noise, that you've been terrified of yourself all along. Maybe that's where it begins. And maybe, just maybe, peace is waiting inside the one place you've avoided your entire life. You. You say you fear being alone, but what you're really afraid of is meeting yourself without distractions. It's not the silence itself that unsettles you, it's what the silence reveals. And when you finally have no one to impress, no one to blame, and nowhere to hide, that's when the real you comes crawling out. And that's the one you've tried to bury for years, the one full of insecurities, regrets, abandoned dreams, impulsive guilt, repressed anger, and questions you never had the courage to ask. When the world quiets down, that's who knocks on the door. And you're not ready to answer. Because when you're alone, the mirror becomes impossible to escape. And in that mirror, you don't see the version you show to the world. You see the damage. You see how you betrayed yourself over and over just to be liked. You see the relationships you tolerated because you feared being alone more than you valued your dignity. You see how many times you silenced your truth so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You see how much of your life you wasted trying to be needed instead of being known. That's not just painful, it's paralyzing. And that's why most people don't make it past this part of the journey. Because this is where you either face yourself or you run back into the noise. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow, the unconscious part of us we refuse to see, grows stronger the longer we suppress it. And you can feel it, can't you? That quiet rage when you're alone, that sadness with no name, that heaviness that creeps into your chest when no one's around to distract you. That's not random. That's your shadow begging to be seen. But you've called it just stress. You've blamed it on your job, your family, your circumstances, anything but yourself, because admitting that it lives inside you, that it is you, is terrifying. But here's the paradox. Everything you're running from is actually the key to the peace you claim to seek. You want to heal, but you avoid the wound. You want to feel whole, but you refuse to touch the broken pieces. You want clarity, but you dodge the confusion that leads to it. The pain isn't the enemy, it's the invitation. But you keep slamming the door shut. And so it returns, louder every time, more suffocating, more disorienting, more unbearable. So you try to fix it from the outside. You change your job, you change cities, you cut people off, you rearrange your furniture and color code your calendar. You chase perfection because deep down, you think that if you finally get everything under control, the chaos inside will disappear. But it doesn't. It only grows, because control is a lie. You can't micromanage your inner world into peace. It has to be faced, not formatted. And let's not pretend that this isn't a choice. You know when you're escaping. You know when you're reaching for the phone just to avoid sitting with your thoughts. You know when you're staying busy because slowing down would mean feeling again. You know when the relationships you're in are based on need, not love. You know when you've outgrown your habits, but keep clinging to them out of fear. You know all of this, but knowing doesn't change anything, doing does. And that's where you've stayed stuck. You know, but you don't move. You feel, but you don't act. You see the cage, but you refuse to walk out. And this is where the suffering compounds. Because now, you're not just lost, you're lost and aware of it. That's the worst kind of pain. Knowing you're betraying yourself in real time and still doing it anyway. Watching yourself shrink in rooms that require your presence. Hearing your own voice tremble every time you try to speak your truth. Feeling your intuition scream as you smile and nod your way through another day, pretending to be okay. That's not peace. That's internal erosion. But here's what no one tells you. There's a reason you haven't broken yet. There's a reason the weight hasn't crushed you. It's because underneath the fear, the confusion, the anxiety, you're still there. The real you. Not the version you perform. Not the one shaped by trauma or expectations. The one that existed before you were told who you had to become to be loved. And that part of you is waiting. Not for a perfect plan, not for a perfect day, just for permission to speak, to grieve, to rage, to feel, to be. Carl Jung once said that loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being unable to communicate the things that are important to you. That's what you're suffering from, not solitude, but emotional exile. You feel like no one sees you because you stopped showing who you are. You edited yourself out of your own life, and now you don't recognize your reflection. But what if that's not the end of the story? What if the silence that scares you is also the doorway that frees you? That's the next step. And it's not about fixing, it's about facing. It's about sitting in the room with all the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding and not running this time, letting them speak, letting them cry, letting them tell you what they've been trying to say all along. Because once you do that, everything begins to shift. You walk through life pretending to be whole, but inside there's a war you've never dared to name. It's not loud, it doesn't scream, but it drains you quietly, constantly. And the worst part, you've worn that exhaustion like a badge of honor. You've convinced yourself that being emotionally numb is just part of being strong, that staying silent is a form of wisdom, that pushing your pain down means you're handling life well, but you're not. You're suffocating under the weight of your own unspoken truths. Every smile you fake, every "I'm fine" you whisper, every time you distract yourself with work, screens, or toxic relationships, you're not surviving. You're disappearing little by little, and the world doesn't even notice because you've become a master of hiding it. You joke, you perform, you stay busy, and people think you're doing great. But when you're finally alone, the performance ends, and you feel it, that ache, that pull, that haunting sense that something inside you is begging to be acknowledged. But you've buried it so deep, even you don't know how to reach it anymore. This is the hypocrisy of modern emotional life. We live in a world that glorifies authenticity, yet punishes vulnerability. We're told to be ourselves, but only if that self is palatable, productive, and pleasing. You learned early on that certain parts of you were unacceptable, too loud, too sensitive, too angry, too needy, so you cut them off. You called it maturity. You told yourself, "I've grown." But the truth is, you've amputated parts of your soul to fit into spaces that never deserved you. And the pain of that betrayal doesn't go away. It accumulates. It becomes resentment, fatigue, a hollow version of existence where you smile on the outside but scream on the inside. Carl Jung didn't shy away from this. He knew the real danger isn't in the pain itself, but in what happens when we pretend it's not there. He wrote about the persona, the mask we wear to face the world, and how that mask, if worn too long, fuses to our identity. We start to forget who we were before the world told us who to be. And that's what's happened to you. You've worn the mask for so long, you started to believe it was your face. But deep down, something still whispers, "This isn't me. This was never me." And so you overcompensate. You become overly kind, overly agreeable, overly accommodating. Not because you're generous, but because you're terrified of being rejected. You want peace, so you sacrifice your voice. You want love, so you tolerate disrespect. You want to belong, so you shrink. But the irony is brutal. The more you shrink, the more invisible you become. And then you wonder why no one sees you, why no one truly listens, why you always feel like a stranger, even in rooms filled with people who claim to care. This is where the damage becomes cyclical. You keep trying to be better. You read books, listen to podcasts, follow motivational pages, recite affirmations, but none of it sticks because deep down, you're still trying to fix what isn't broken. You. The problem isn't that you're not enough. The problem is you've convinced yourself you have to be someone else just to be accepted. And every time you betray your essence for approval, you lose a piece of your peace. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But privilege isn't given, it's earned through discomfort, through honesty, through choosing truth over performance. And that journey isn't glamorous, it's brutal. It means disappointing people, setting boundaries, saying no, letting go of relationships that once defined you. It means grieving the version of yourself that only existed to be liked. And that grief, it's real, it's valid, but it's necessary, because what's the alternative? Another decade of pretending, another year of over-explaining yourself to people who never really listen, another day spent in rooms where your silence is more accepted than your truth. That's not life. That's emotional exile, and no amount of external validation can fill the emptiness that comes from self-abandonment. That void you feel? It's not a flaw, it's a signal, a wake-up call from the part of you that refuses to die quietly. Let me know in the comments, what part of you have you been hiding from the world and from yourself? Your story matters. And if you felt seen by this video, don't forget to subscribe. More content like this is coming just for you. So what happens if you stop pretending? If you finally stop negotiating your worth for comfort? If you stand in a room and say exactly what you feel, regardless of who stays or leaves? What happens when you remove the mask? Not in private, but in public. When you show up unedited, in your full complexity, you risk rejection. You risk judgment, but you also risk being seen, truly seen. And that's where healing begins, not when people like your mask, but when someone looks you in the eye and says, I see you, all of you, and I don't flinch. But before anyone else can do that, you have to be the first. You have to sit with yourself, look into your own eyes and say, I see you. Even the parts you hate, even the parts that still ache, even the chaos, especially the chaos. Because that's where your power lives, not in perfection, not in performance, but in presence. In the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are beneath the noise. And that truth, it's messy, it's inconvenient, it scares people, but it will also set you free. Are you ready to meet it? The problem isn't that life is too loud. The problem is that your inner voice has gone silent. Not because it has nothing to say, but because you stopped listening a long time ago. You drowned it in noise, notifications, endless scrolling, people's opinions, toxic optimism, self-help slogans that sound good but mean nothing. You filled every empty moment with stimulation, thinking it was better than being alone. But you weren't avoiding boredom. You were avoiding yourself. You see, solitude is not the enemy, it's the mirror. And that mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter you. It doesn't sugarcoat your wounds. It shows you the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. The jealousy you deny, the bitterness you carry, the fear that controls every decision, the lies you told yourself to survive. When you're finally alone, those truths have nowhere else to go. They surface, and you panic. Not because you're lonely, but because now you're forced to face them. And that's terrifying. Because what if you're not who you thought you were? What if all your strength was just endurance? What if your confidence was just ego protecting you from shame? What if the success you chase is just a distraction from feeling deeply unworthy? What if the love you crave is only there to fill a hole you've never dared to look into? These questions don't come when you're surrounded by people. They come in the silence, in the late-night stares at the ceiling, in the quiet after the party ends, in the moments when there's no one left to impress and nowhere left to run. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He knew that peace doesn't arrive through avoidance. It doesn't come from pretending your darkness isn't there. Real peace comes from confrontation, from walking into the abyss of your own psyche and not turning away. Jung called this shadow work, the process of integrating the parts of yourself you'd rather disown. Not to glorify them, not to justify them, but to reclaim your wholeness. Because here's the truth, the parts of you that feel unworthy are not the enemy. They are exiled children, locked in the basement of your consciousness, screaming for acknowledgement. Every time you distract yourself instead of listening, you reinforce the belief that those parts are shameful, and so they grow louder. They show up as anxiety, as depression, as compulsive behavior, as self-sabotage. And you keep treating the symptoms, wondering why nothing works. never realizing the root is your refusal to face yourself. This is the brutal paradox. You want peace, but peace demands pain first. Not because suffering is noble, but because healing begins where illusion ends. You cannot make peace with a lie, and most of us are living lies. We lie to ourselves about what we want, about who we are, about what we're willing to tolerate. We say we want truth, but we curate our lives to avoid it. We say we want connection, but we wear masks. We say we want freedom, but we cling to comfort. And then we wonder why we feel lost. You are not lost. You are buried under years of conditioning, expectations, social roles, emotional armor. And every time you say, "I don't know who I am anymore," it's not because you've changed. It's because you've forgotten. You've layered so many versions of who you think you should be that your real self can't breathe. And that's why solitude feels suffocating, because it strips you bare. It peels off the roles, the filters, the labels, and leaves you staring at what's underneath. And what's underneath? That's the question you keep avoiding, because you think it's weakness. You think it's emptiness. But what if it's power? What if the part of you that you've buried is the only part that actually knows how to live? What if your pain isn't there to punish you, but to point you home? Jung believed that wholeness is the integration of opposites, light and dark, strength and softness, logic and emotion. And until you integrate, you remain at war with yourself. You will keep attracting chaos. You will keep repeating patterns. Not because you're cursed, but because the universe will not let you pretend forever. It will keep sending you mirrors in the form of people, situations, breakdowns, until you wake up. Until you realize that the peace you seek is not outside of you. It's in the wound you refuse to examine. So let me ask you, when was the last time you were truly alone, without distractions, without noise, without running away? When was the last time you looked at yourself and said, "I'm staying. I'm not escaping this time"? That's where the transformation begins, in the decision to stay, in the decision to sit in the silence long enough for the truth to rise. And yes, it will hurt. The first layer is always grief. Grief for the years you lost pretending. Grief for the love you gave away too cheaply. Grief for the dreams you abandoned to stay safe. But underneath the grief is you, the real you, the one who doesn't need to prove anything. The one who doesn't have to beg for love. The one who doesn't fear being alone because they are no longer fragmented. That's what Jung meant when he said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." You've been dreaming long enough, fantasizing about peace, about healing, about freedom, without doing the work to face what's inside. But now you're waking up. And awakening is violent. It breaks your illusions, it shatters your false identity, it burns away the lies. But in the ashes, something else grows, something terrifying and beautiful, yourself. And once you meet yourself in that silence, everything changes. There comes a point when you stop trying to fix your life and start learning to feel it. Not manipulate it, not escape it, not reshape it to impress someone else, but to actually feel it. That's when your healing begins. Not when everything is under control, not when you've solved every problem, but when you finally say, "I'm tired of running from myself." The irony is, you never needed to become someone else. You just needed to return to who you were before you were told you were broken, before shame, before guilt, before all the masks. But that version of you can't be reached by performance. It's revealed through surrender. Comment below, what truth hit you the hardest today? I read everything, and your voice deserves to be heard. And if you're new here, subscribe now. We're creating a space where silence becomes strength. Carl Jung knew this. He spoke of individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you were always meant to be. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you dare to enter the depths of your inner world without flinching. When you stop blaming the world for your emptiness and start taking radical responsibility for your own presence. And this is the truth nobody wants to hear. Your relationships are just reflections. The people who ignore you, mirrors of the ways you ignore yourself. The ones who don't value you, echoes of your own self-disregard. The disrespect you tolerate, a shadow of your own buried self-hatred. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are willing to tolerate in silence. You keep waiting for someone to see you, but have you truly looked at yourself, without judgment, without distraction, without running? The fear you call loneliness is actually your soul begging you to stop betraying it. And every time you fill your silence with noise, with people, with validation, you bury yourself one layer deeper. So how do you begin to dig your way out? You sit in the silence, in the discomfort. You let it burn. You stop distracting yourself every time it gets uncomfortable. You let the grief surface. You let the old wounds speak. And most importantly, you listen, not with your ears, but with your presence. You don't analyze, fix, or justify. You feel. Because healing is not an intellectual process, it is an emotional reckoning. And in that reckoning, something strange happens. You start to become visible to yourself again. Not as a broken project to be fixed, but as a whole being who was never missing, just buried. Buried under everyone else's version of who you were supposed to be. Buried under the shoulds and musts and what ifs. You start to unlearn everything that made you disappear. And the moment you do that, the world begins to shift. People respond to presence, not noise, not drama, not people-pleasing. Presence, real, grounded, unapologetic presence, the kind that doesn't need to perform to be loved. The kind that doesn't beg to be chosen. The kind that says, I'm here and I'm enough, even in my silence. That's the presence that changes rooms. That's the presence that commands respect. And that presence can only come from someone who's walked through their own shadows and come out the other side unashamed. So the question is no longer, why don't people see me? The question is, why have I refused to see myself? You've been asking the wrong question all along. You were never invisible. You were just hiding behind politeness, behind performance, behind perfection. But now it's time to be seen. And maybe that's terrifying. Maybe it feels like death. And in some ways it is. The death of who you thought you needed to be. The death of your false self. But that death is sacred, because on the other side is the only version of you that was ever real. The one who is no longer afraid of the silence. The one who can sit in stillness and feel safe there. The one who doesn't chase love, but becomes it. The one who no longer needs to be saved because they finally came home to themselves. Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. You've spent enough time dreaming. Now, awaken. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I know these words weren't easy. They weren't meant to be. Because transformation doesn't happen through comfort. It happens through truth. And you're not here because you want soft lies. You're here because you're ready to see, to feel, to remember. If this message touched you, if you saw even a glimpse of yourself in it, leave a comment below. Share your silence, share your truth. You're not alone in this. We're walking this path together. And before you go, there's something waiting for you in the next video. Something deeper, something even more revealing. Tap into it now. Let this journey continue. You've started something powerful. Don't stop now.